Hi, I'm Susie Garden, and this is the Ageless and Awesome podcast. I'm an age-defying naturopath and clinical nutritionist, and I'm here to bust myths around women's health and aging so that you can be ageless and awesome in your 40s, 50s, and beyond. The Ageless and Awesome podcast is dedicated to helping women through perimenopause and menopause with great health, a positive mindset, and outrageous confidence. Hit subscribe or follow now, and let's get started. Hello, gorgeous one, and welcome to this week's episode of the Ageless and Awesome podcast. I'm back from Byron, and I have to say thank you so much for your support of last Thursday's episode, which I thought, oh man, the audio quality wasn't fantastic, but I got such fantastic feedback from it and so many downloads. Like, obviously, it's a topic that has excited a few people. I hope so. I was really excited even when I was recording it, and I hope that came through. So if you haven't listened to it yet, go back to last Thursday's episode, kind of around mindset. And yeah, I think you'll like it. So today's episode is going to be a little bit of a follow-up from my ep on the 23rd of January. So if you haven't listened to that one, that was about gut health and weight loss. And I've had another really great response to that ep. And I have a feeling that I said I was going to do a follow-up and I haven't done it yet. So that's what I thought I would do today, is talk more about gut health, some more specific things that is a little bit, I guess, more information on some of the things that I mentioned in that episode, because I mean, gut health, as you know, if you've followed me for any length of time, is something I'm absolutely passionate about. I mean, as a naturopath, we are taught that the gut is the seat of all health, and what we put into our bodies becomes part of us. When you think about this, it becomes really important when you're eating any sort of food, whether it's proteins, carbs, fats, whatever it is, it's used in your body either as energy, or it's going to become part of your brain chemicals. It's going to become part of your muscle cells. It's going to become part of your hormones. Like, we use our food as it's broken down, we use it to build things in our body. So that whole philosophy of you are what you eat is absolutely true. And also modern nutrition, we say you are what you absorb, because so many people have difficulty absorbing because their gut health isn't great. But please have a look at that episode on the 23rd of January if you haven't listened to that one already, because that will give you some background to what I'm diving into today, which is actually, it sounds kind of boring. That's why I haven't started with what we're actually going to talk about today. But it is all about the microbiome and fibre specifically, because I think when I talk about fibre, there's a number of different layers to this. And I think it's really important that you understand what fibers are going to feed the gut and what are going to perform different actions in the body, so that you know what kind of foods to actually eat. So this kind of started, I guess, why I wanted to dive into this particular aspect today is because I mentioned in that gut health podcast on the 23rd of Jan that, you know, the role of the gut is well beyond just digesting our food. It has so many roles, including modulating our inflammatory response. And we know that inflammation is a massive factor when it comes to weight gain, also as a blocker to weight loss. But more importantly, inflammation is the root cause of pretty much every mental and physical health condition that we have. There's an inflammatory link to depression. There's an inflammatory link to cancer, to cardiovascular disease, to virtually everything you can think of. Obviously, there's also just some genetic diseases and chromosomal diseases and things like that. That's a little different. But inflammation is virtually the cause to everything, so to every disease. So if we can modulate and reduce inflammation in our body, it is so incredible for our long-term health. It's also anti-aging. And I mean that anti-aging in the medical context, not so much in the aesthetic context, although it absolutely helps with the aesthetic context as well. But anyway, I'm getting off on a little tangent here. What I wanted to talk about was the microbiome and how it feeds on fiber. All right, so we have to nurture our microbiome. We have to protect it by reducing our use of antibiotics wherever possible. But of course, if you need the antibiotics, please take them. I'm not saying don't take them. If you need them, definitely take them. But you just need to protect your microbiome as much as possible. Other ways you can protect it is with your alcohol consumption, eliminate it if possible, or reduce it to really as little as possible. Sugar, reducing sugar as much as possible, reducing processed foods as much as possible. So that's pretty much anything in a packet. All of these sort of things help in terms of protecting your microbiome. Also, managing your stress is a huge part of this. So managing your stress, I know that we can't always get away from our stressors. So learning to manage your breath, learning to get out in nature, learning to move your body to help kind of ground yourself. All of these things are really important. But let's talk specifically about our feeding our microbiome, because our microbiome feeds on fiber. And fiber is just basically carbohydrates that aren't digestible. They're not digested. And the microbiome ferments these carbohydrates, these dietary fibers. And we want to talk about the different types of fibers so you know which ones are really great for feeding your gut bacteria and which ones have other roles. So as I mentioned, these are non-digestible, so they're resistant to digestion in the small intestine, and they may or may not be fermentable, and the fermentation is really important because that fermentable fiber is what your microbiome really loves. So let's get into it. So dietary fiber, I think I may have mentioned this in the other podcast, it doesn't just keep the digestive system healthy, it also has the capacity obviously to help with defecation. That helps with your detox pathway out of the bowel. It helps with, you may have heard this actually before, that you can reduce cholesterol by increasing certain fibers. That's why oats are really good for reducing cholesterol. They just help bind it and get it out of the body. And also fiber has a really important role in keeping your blood glucose stable. And again, that's really important for weight loss because it avoids that craving for carbs when the blood glucose drops too much. So we've got a few different types of fiber. There's actually 4 I'm going to talk about today: soluble, insoluble, readily fermentable, and resistant starch. So a few things, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these. You know me, I don't like to drone on and on and on. I like to give you the information you need to know so you can get on with your day, because I know I don't have time to sit around and listen to super long podcasts. So soluble fiber is kind of what we would describe as viscous. So it's things that gets a little bit gooey as it goes into your digestive system. So it's things like pectin. Pectin is found in apples, particularly browned apples. It's really, it's an interesting thing, isn't it? We don't really like browned apples. So when you cut it and you let the apple sit, or you grate it in particular and let the apple sit and brown, but that tends to give you your pectin. So pectins, things like gums. I'm not talking about chewing gum. I'm talking about gum in vegetables and fruits. This is mainly found in the plant cell walls. And we know that these types of fibers, these soluble fibers, do lower your bad cholesterol levels. Can also help with constipation. So getting, the fecal matter out of your body. And the kind of foods that you're looking at are oats, barley, psyllium husks, lentils, all fantastic for this. So that's your soluble fiber. So it's essentially, to summarize that, it reduces your cholesterol and it helps with constipation. Then we have insoluble fiber. And that's kind of like it comes from the plant cell walls. but cellulose, lignins, things like that. And one of the major roles of insoluble fibre is to bulk up the stool and prevent constipation. So that's probably its main thing. It doesn't give you any of that additional benefit necessarily of reducing your cholesterol. And the common sources of insoluble fibre are like whole grain breads, cereal products, wheat bran, rice bran. The skin of fruits and the skin of veggies has that insoluble fibre. Also nuts and seeds. That might be a bit of a surprise. We can tend to think of nuts and seeds as being protein and fats, but they actually can include, is that the word? They can contain, I think, insoluble fibre. So that's just really great for bulking up the stool to prevent constipation, essentially, and really help get your fecal matter out of the body, which helps with detox, and that helps with hormone balance as well. Readily fermentable fibre. Now, this is the juice. This is the ones that really help your gut microbiome. Okay, so the health benefits of fermented fibres, and this means they're fermented in the gut, not fermented and then you have them like a sauerkraut, for example. We're talking about fibres that are fermented inside the body. So the health benefits are mainly because of the products of their fermentation by the large bowel microbiome. And dietary fibre is a major metabolic fuel for the gut microbiota, okay? So I always talk about having to feed your gut. It's with this sort of readily fermentable fibre. And this helps you build, and this is a really critical thing with your microbiome, is diversity. When we look at stool samples, the people with lots of diversity, so lots of different types of microbes in their stool, have better health generally. And when there are health issues, it's when we see a real lack of diversity in people's stool microbiome. That's essentially as simple as it is. So if you have a diverse population of microbes, they're really resilient, they're healthy. What happens is you get a really effective gut barrier. So you may have heard the term leaky gut. So what leaky gut is when the lining of your intestine, so it has like what we call a permeable barrier. And that allows, as the food gets digested, broken down into little molecules of, iron and vitamin C and zinc and all of those vitamins and minerals, etc. They get broken down into molecules. They go through this permeable membrane or permeable wall of the intestine into the bloodstream, and they go where they need to go. And that's what it is. This is called a permeable kind of membrane or a permeable barrier. And when you have an ineffective gut barrier, this is the old term was a leaky gut, but now it's been recognized by the medical profession, which is awesome. And it's called increased intestinal permeability. So when you have this increased intestinal permeability, then larger molecules can get through, and it's theorized that even parts of your microbiome, so some microbes, can get through, and that causes an inflammatory reaction because your immune system will detect it and go, well, you're not supposed to be here, and will launch an attack on those sort of microbes and the molecules that aren't supposed to be there. And that's when you can get all sorts of symptoms going on, such as fatigue, brain fog, skin itching, rashes. I know for myself, if this is happening with me, my eczema will play up, because this is the thing. Increased intestinal permeability is not a medical condition. It's just something that happens. It will happen to absolutely all of us at some time. And generally it will happen when the body's under physical stress. For example, they've done studies in marathon runners, and they took these healthy marathon runners and measured their intestinal permeability. And you can do that through a urine test. So they got all these guys, put them in the trial, tested their urine. They all had fine, no leaky gut. And then they popped them on the treadmill, got them to run a marathon equivalent on the treadmill, did the urine samples again. They all had increased intestinal permeability. All of them. It's part of our stress response. And so, yeah, this is not a medical condition as such. But what we want, as much as we can, is to have this effective gut barrier. And when we have a healthy microbiome, that really sets us up to have that effective gut barrier. We have a lovely, healthy gut mucosa and lowered risk of chronic bowel diseases, which is fantastic as well. And there is even, and this is still, it's theorized that some autoimmune conditions there may be a link to leaky gut and autoimmune conditions. So it is something that's really important to look after our gut health. Now, sources of this type of easily fermented fiber include things like legumes. So legumes are like your chickpeas, so hummus, that's a great one. Lentils are really great and really versatile. So you can chuck them in if you're making like, obviously a bolognese is a really easy one to throw lentils into. You can even put them in with meat if you want to. You can make it just with lentils. You can use it in Mexican food. You can also use things like kidney beans. They're also in that legume category. Obviously, they're great in Mexican food. So there's heaps of ways you can use legumes, and they are fabulous for your gut and, great for the environment. Like, there's so many great reasons to bring legumes into your diet if you're not already having them. And they're very, very easy to manage once you know what you're doing. Leeks are another fantastic fermentable fiber. Onion, garlic, unripe bananas are ideal. There's just so many. And these are also called prebiotics. So if you just Google prebiotic fiber, you will find a whole list of foods that are very easy to source. They're not expensive, and you should be including some of them in your diet every single day as part of looking after your gut health. And remembering that when we have healthy gut, it really helps a lot with our weight management. Okay. The last part of this fiber podcast, I'm going to talk about resistant starch. So resistant starch is part of starchy food, which I'll get into what those foods are shortly, that they're not digested, they're not absorbed, and they're really important also for your good gut bacteria in the large intestine. And this is where we're getting into short-chain fatty acid production. So I talked about this briefly last week. In that gut health podcast on the 23rd of January. And so, when this resistant starch comes into the large intestine, which is where the majority of your microbiome is living, then those microbes love it. They feed on it. And in particular, they start to ferment and produce these short-chain fatty acids as a product of this fermentation. So these are called metabolites. So I'm getting a little bit technical here. These are called metabolites, and they're vital for normal gut function. So these are really, really important. And they are important also for maintaining that health and integrity of the bowel wall. So reducing your risk of getting that leaky gut or that increased intestinal permeability. They also help protect against DNA damage caused by unhealthy diets. So again, really, really important. And this level of protection is correlated strongly with the amount of short-chain fatty acids in the bowel. And especially there's one in particular called butyrate. And whenever I'm looking at microbiome testing, you always make sure if you're going to go and get microbiome testing done, get it done by a practitioner, because they can guide you to what the right test is, because we definitely want to be measuring the butyrate levels in your stool, because that tells us how well your microbiome is operating. It's telling us about, are you having enough of the right foods that are able to allow those microbes to produce that butyrate in particular, it's really important. So, and the more we research the microbiome, then we understand the potential, I guess, of resistant starch to prevent and slow the progression of many common diseases, because we know that these short-chain fatty acids are able to influence metabolism of tissues beyond the gut, including fat tissue, or adipose tissue is the medical name for it. So we know that this influences that. So all starchy foods contain resistant starch, but the richest sources of resistant starch are things like, again, we're getting into the legumes, chickpeas, red kidney beans, navy beans, which are also known as cannellini beans, other legumes, cooked and you may have heard of this. If you cook and cool rice, cook and cool potatoes, cook and cool pasta, that builds this resistant starch. And underripe bananas, again, as I mentioned before, they're actually a really good source of this resistant starch, which is fantastic for your gut health and your whole body health, as I've just discussed. And the thing is, it's not like one particular fiber is better than another. I mean, I probably would say potentially your resistant starch and your fermentable fibers probably maybe a little bit better because they do feed your gut microbiome. However, a diversity of fiber is important. And that's really easy by just getting a diversity of food in your diet, a diversity of fruits and vegetables, I should say, specifically, and legumes in your diets. So, and we also know actually by combining fibers, you get this synergistic effect. So synergistic effect means that when you combine two things together, you actually get more than the total of those two things together. So we talk about additive effects and synergistic. Additive is just like 1 + 1 = 2. A synergistic effect is 1 + 1 = 4. So you get actually more bang for your buck with the more diversity in your diet. And you will hear that often when we talk. Any nutritionist, any dietitian will tell you diversity is super important. And the thing is, as we know, we all kind of get in our little ruts and our routines with our food. I'm guilty of it as well, that, it gets kind of easy to not have to think about food and just kind of have similar things on a weekly or a fortnightly or whatever basis. And I have had some clients actually who virtually eat the same thing every day because it's easy. And let's face it, there's a lot of challenge in life. So we want things to be as easy as possible when it comes to our food. But if you can, when you're thinking about, and you do really need to think about what you should be eating on a week-to-week basis, try and plan in diversity into your food. And a great way to do that is to eat seasonally. And, nature knows what we need to eat and when we need to eat it. So, and that also makes it much more economical when you're shopping to eat seasonally, because it's those kind of foods that are going to be in surplus, that are going to be better priced at the supermarket. And they're also going to be local foods rather than imported foods, which have traveled, which have, as we know, as food, the longer food spends out of the ground, the nutrition, particularly the antioxidants and all of those other good things, can drop away a little. So the fresher the food and the more seasonal the food, the better it's going to be for you. So I hope that has been helpful. I love talking about any of this stuff, gut health, nutrition, etc. So please let me know what kind of topics you want within that, or any topics. I've just had a whole bunch sent to me by my beautiful ladies on my mailing list, and I'm working my way through that. But I just had some really specific feedback about that gut health and weight loss podcast I did a couple of weeks ago now, and I thought I would just follow up on that because I'm pretty sure I said I was going to within that podcast, and then I got a little bit distracted with some other topics. So anyway, I hope you've enjoyed today, and I hope you're having a fantastic week so far. I'll be back on Thursday with Q&A. I will see you then. Thanks so much for joining me today on the Ageless and Awesome podcast. If you liked today's episode, please make sure you click the little plus button if you're on Apple Podcasts or the follow button if you're on Spotify so that you can get each new episode delivered to you every single week. If you like free stuff, and who doesn't, then head over to susiegarden.com and grab my 8 essential age-defying secrets every woman over 40 should know right now. Or if you'd like to continue the discussion, head over to Instagram and DM me at Susie Garden Wellness. I'd love to connect with you.